Chess greetings to you all and welcome to Chess Collab. Alfred is my name. Today, our main focus is on the king. And please remember to subscribe so that once I have done the next lesson, you should be able to get some sort of notification. Right, as you can see here on this chessboard, which I'm displaying, where I have placed the blue circles, that's where the king can go to. In other words, the king only moves one step at a time. I love to describe the king as the oldest piece on the chessboard. Let's see. Right, in this case, it can move to that circle there on d6. Same applies to there, b6. There we go, c5. Remember, naming of the squares is what I'm using in this case. First of all, you indicate the name, then you mention the number. Right, let's move on there, and also it can move there. I'm referring to only the black king in this case. There, it can move on to b7. Right, let's look at the white king now. Right, white king from f3, it can go to f4. From there as well, it can go to g3. Right, it can go to g2, f2, and also e3. Same applies, it can land on e4. Right, it can also land on e2. Right, as I've already indicated, but remember, whenever it moves one step, other rules will chip in. We are going to dive in more rules associated with the king as we progress. Right. So I've already indicated, but remember, if you trap the enemy king, you win the game. And we describe that as checkmate. If your king is trapped, you lose the game. You have been checkmated. That's how we describe the situation. But remember, in chess, there are so many ways of finishing the game. We're going to cover the different ways we can finish the game in chess. Remember, we can also talk in terms of artists in chess. We can draw. A game can be drawn. But normally we allocate half a point to each whenever a game is drawn. Right. Let's carry on with the king, how it captures. Right. It captures the way it moves. Remember, the king only moves one step. In any square where there is no any attack. In other words, an attack this square. As long as it's one step from its original move. One step from its initial move. Right, in this case, it can capture there. It can capture a pawn on g7. Remember, a king can move backwards, forward, sideways, and so on, as long as it is one step and as long as it is going to land on a square which is not under attack. Right. The white king there can capture c2. Right. On c2, what is there? It's the black queen. Right. The black king, it can attack e7. What is on e7? It's a white rook. So this is how the king captures. And also it can capture. White king can capture the bishop on c4. So just to remember, in chess, we capture the way a specific piece can move, especially when we're looking at the king. Right. Now, the king cannot move to any square that is under attack. Remember, I've already mentioned this, but now let's bring in the scenarios in this case. So in this case, as you can see, the bishop is slicing through its diagonal. It's attacking where I have put the black line to indicate the areas where it can attack. Right. In this case, the king can only move to that blue circle, d5. That means it's not under attack. Can also move to f5. I am talking in terms of the white king. Right. Then it can also move to d4. So in other words, those are three squares where I have placed the blue circles. That's where the white king can go to. So it have to choose one option. And that's how we say we've executed the move for the white king. Right. Let's move on and let's see. Well, it might sound easy, but others can describe this, the king's move, as the hardest piece in your army to understand. But let's see. Right, in this case, the rook is attacking all the squares on its right hand side. I must say the right hand side towards h3. So all those squares are under attack. Right, let's see. It cannot move to d3. I'm referring to the white king. d3, e3, f3, because of the black rook, which is controlling that rank. In other words, all those squares are under attack. Which squares exactly? Let me just grab my pointer here so that you should be able to see what I'm referring to. This square is under attack. Same applies to this one, and that one, and that one. All these squares are under attack. And also for the diagonal, those squares are under attack. So it cannot move to e5 or f4 simply because of the bishop, which is slicing through there. Right. Now, if you move any other piece to a square where it is attacked, it runs the risk of getting taken. In other words, it becomes an illegal move. That's how we describe it in chess. In other words, you're putting yourself in check. You're putting the king under check, which is not allowed in chess. But you cannot move the king to any attacked square, as you cannot move a rook like a bishop or on a diagonal. Or in other words, you want to move a bishop like a knight. So remember, the chess pieces are guided by the rules. Let's move on. Kings can never stand next to each other. Remember this. They are not allowed. Right. What do I mean? In this case, the king is not allowed to be on f4. Both the king, the white king, or the black king. Not allowed to be on f4. Not allowed to be on f3. Not allowed to be on f2. Why? Simply because kings can never stand next to each other. Remember this rule. It applies. Please remember it during the game situation. Please just remember this. Right. Let's move on. Let's add more things. Right. Once they go to 1, 2, or 3, it becomes an illegal move. It's not allowed. But we allow you to move back in the event that you have forgotten, especially in your early days. Right. Go back and play a different move instead. It's allowed. Remember, in chess, we believe in touch move. Once you touch a piece, you have to move it. Right. Then the king is allowed to go there on e4. Right. Also, there, d3, d2, e2, but not allowed to move to the green stars. Right. So in other words, the green stars are under attack. In other words, they are under attack by the different pieces. But I can see here, I've also included star number 4. Star number 4, the king can go there. Star number 4, the king can go star number 4. Please take note of that. Right. Then on D2, the queen is controlling that square. In other words, here, you cannot go there. You cannot go there simply because of the queen. The queen is slicing through. Remember, queen moves diagonally. It moves in ranks. It moves in 5s, and so on. Right. Then on 5 again, the rook is guiding that square and also guiding, slicing through this 5. So in other words, the king cannot go there because of that. But on f4, the king can go there. Right. Because there is no any other piece. No, there is a piece. The queen is slicing through. Right. I That was an oversight from my side. On e4, the queen is slicing through there. So that means it cannot go there on e4. Right, let's move on. But why? Because they are under attack. You cannot put the king to under attack, move to an attack the square. In other words, right? We allow you to move back and play a different move instead, as long as you are making use of the same piece. But if you cannot move that same piece, you're allowed to move that other piece where you are able to move. Right. That's why I've told you it might be hard for you to remember the king's move. Right. And what is allowed and what is not allowed. Right. There on 6, it's not allowed. Black king is not allowed to move there simply because of the white rook. White rook is controlling the entire file, entire h5. So remember that. Right. Same applies. There, it's not allowed as well. Cannot move there. Remember, the king moves one step as long around itself. King is not allowed to move there again. Right. Remember, kings never get captured. In chess, once the king is captured, the game is over. And remember, we don't capture the king. We don't remove the king from the chessboard. Because remember, capturing is removing, but you can always attack while it is on the chessboard. Right. Right, let's see what we need to remember. You can never play a move which lets your king be captured or eaten into an attack, as you've already observed. This would be an illegal move. We're going to talk more about this. We're going to talk more about check and checkmate in the next lessons. Right, if you play an illegal move, you have to take the move back and play another move instead. It's allowed. We always allow you. You have to look. Remember in chess, look, think, and move. By so doing, you're doing the justice to the game which you're playing and which belongs to you. Remember to subscribe and share so that you can get the next lesson once I've uploaded it. Thank you so much for joining.